March 1, 1642, New Haven Colony. A married pig farmer named George Spencer stands before magistrates who accuse him of fathering a deformed piglet. The evidence: the piglet has one eye and Spencer has one eye. The punishment they're considering isn't a fine, it's death by hanging for bestiality. And Spencer will confess, not once, but 3 times, then recant twice, creating a legal nightmare that colonial records preserve in excruciating detail. But here's the question that haunts those documents. Why did New Haven execute the pig before they'd even convicted the man? The trial record survived. John Winthrop's journal entries survived. The execution warrants survived. What you're about to hear comes from Massachusetts Bay Colony court records, Connecticut archives, and the detailed notes of Puritan governors who believed they were building a new Jerusalem in the wilderness. You'll discover why these colonies made sodomy a capital crime when England rarely executed for it, how a 13-year-old servant became the first person hanged for homosexual acts in the Americas, and the disturbing legal innovation these Puritans created that modern scholars call prosecuting thought crimes. Every word is documented. The Massachusetts Bay Colony adopts its first law code in 1641. It's called the Body of Liberties. Capital crime number 7, sodomy. The text comes almost verbatim from Leviticus 20:13. The penalty is death. But here's what makes New England different from England itself. Back in London, the 1533 Buggery Act was on the books but rarely enforced. Between 1800 and 1835, England executed about 50 men for sodomy. In the entire 1600s, the number was lower. Puritan New England, with a fraction of England's population, executed at least 5 people for sodomy-related offenses before 1700. They were more zealous than the kingdom they'd fled. The man who drafted much of this legal code was Reverend John Cotton. Born 1585, Cambridge educated, arrived in Boston 1633. Cotton's own grandson would later write that the old man believed Massachusetts existed to prove that scripture could govern every detail of civil society. Capital crimes needed 2 witnesses or a confession. For hidden sins like sodomy, Cotton and his fellow ministers created a workaround. Circumstantial evidence could justify torture to extract confession. No other common law jurisdiction was doing this. The first test case came fast. William Plain. Guilford, Connecticut. 1646. The records say he was a married man from England. He's accused of corrupting youth, specifically of masturbatory acts with 2 men, and of encouraging other men towards same-sex contact. The charge sheet, preserved in Connecticut colony records, doesn't just accuse him of acts. It accuses him of frustrating the ordinance of marriage and spreading homosexual behavior like a contagion. New Haven Colony executes him. He's the first, but the trial records reveal something chilling. The magistrates don't just want to punish the act. They want to eliminate the idea. Now go back 4 years. 1642, New Haven again. This is the George Spencer case, and the records are almost comedic in their horror. Spencer is a servant, described in documents as having one eye and a blemished face. A sow births a malformed piglet with one eye. Witnesses swear the piglet looks like Spencer. Under Puritan logic, bestiality could leave a literal mark on the offspring. Governor Theophilus Eaton orders Spencer questioned. He confesses. Then he reclaims his confession, saying he was drunk. Then he confesses again. The colony has a problem. Deuteronomy 17:6 requires 2 witnesses or a confession that stands. Spencer's confession won't stand still, so they kill the pig first. The execution warrant for the sow survives. They need the animal dead before the trial concludes, because if Spencer is acquitted, they've killed evidence. If he's convicted, Leviticus 20:15 requires the animal to die anyway. The pig hangs. Then Spencer, watching his co-accused dangle from a rope, confesses a 3rd time. Final. He hangs shortly after. The magistrates record their satisfaction that God's law has been fulfilled. But the real crisis is building in Massachusetts. 1641. 3 men on the ship Talbot are accused of lewd behavior and unclean carriage one with another. The details in Governor John Winthrop's journal are specific. They were caught in mutual masturbation. 2 are whipped. The third 5 Peach is more suspect because he's done it before, but they can't execute him. Only 1 witness. The frustration in Winthrop's writing is palpable. He consults ministers across the colony. How do we convict hidden sin? The answer they develop is testimonial stacking. If a man has a reputation, if he's been suspected before, if witnesses can testify to corrupt speech or effeminate behavior, circumstantial evidence can pile up to meet the threshold. They're building a legal architecture to prosecute identity, not just acts. Then comes the case that crystallizes everything. Same year as Spencer. A different colony. William Hackett, described in records as a young man indentured, is accused of sodomy. But the key figure is a child. The records identify him only as a boy of 13 or 14 years, a servant. His name appears in some documents as Nathaniel. The accusation: Hackett sodomized him. The boy is interrogated separately. The detail in the trial records is nauseating. Magistrates ask him to describe the act in physical detail to prove he's not fabricating. He does. They ask if he consented. Here the Puritan logic becomes a death trap. If he consented, he's guilty of sodomy. If he didn't, he's a victim. But his testimony alone might not be enough to convict Hackett without a second witness. The boy says he resisted at first, but then submitted. The magistrates rule this is consent under duress, which still counts as the sin of sodomy. Both are convicted. Both are sentenced to death. The boy is 13. Winthrop's journal, March 1642. A boy of 13 was executed for sodomy, he having been abused by another, and by him drawn to the same wickedness. The language is passive. Abused by another. Drawn to wickedness. But the colony hangs him anyway. The court records justify it. The boy confessed to prior acts of masturbation, which showed a corrupted nature. He was already on the path. Execution was mercy. It prevented a lifetime of sin. Hackett hangs beside him. The boy's name isn't carved on any memorial. Some modern historians believe his name was Nathaniel Hubbard, but the records are ambiguous, possibly deliberately. Puritan courts sometimes obscured identities in sodomy cases to avoid perpetuating the sin in memory. No parents are mentioned in the trial records. No one speaks for the child. The ministers who advised on the case wrote approvingly. Reverend Charles Chauncey, later president of Harvard, was consulted on the theological soundness. He concurred. For over 3 centuries, historians framed these cases as proof of Puritan sexual repression, harsh, but applied equally in the quest for godliness. Then in 1981, historian Robert Oakes published a study in the Journal of Social History. He'd gone through every surviving sodomy case in colonial New England. His finding: the law wasn't applied equally at all. Men of status were almost never executed. In 1649, a prominent merchant in Massachusetts, John Winthrop Jr.'s own associate, was accused by multiple witnesses of attempted sodomy with servants. The case was quietly dropped. The records cite insufficient clarity. In 1655, a married man of property in Connecticut was accused of repeated sexual acts with a teenage servant. He was whipped and fined. The servant was banished. The pattern was clear. Executions happened to the powerless. Servants, the poor, the mentally ill, the disfigured like Spencer. Men with land, with family connections, with standing in the church, they faced sanction. But not the rope. The Puritan legal code claimed to impose God's law without respect to persons. The archives prove that was a lie. And there's a second twist, discovered even more recently. In 2003, Richard Godbeer published Sexual Revolution in Early America. He found records of persistent same-sex relationships that never went to trial. Letters between men that used romantic language. Wills that left estates to male companions. Shared beds, shared homes. The colonies knew. But prosecution required scandal public exposure, a complaint, usually from someone with a grievance. The law was a weapon deployed selectively, not a systematic purge. The execution of that 13-year-old wasn't about eliminating sodomy. It was about making an example that reinforced every hierarchy at once. Adult over child, master over servant, godly over sinner. The boy's poverty made him expendable. His age made him a symbol. The records even note the execution was widely attended for the instruction of youth. After 1650, the execution rate drops. Not because the laws changed, they stayed on the books in Connecticut until 1818, in Massachusetts until 1785, but the fervor cooled. The last confirmed execution for consensual sodomy in New England was in 1673. A man named Benjamin Goad, again a servant, again propertyless. After that, punishments shifted to whipping, branding, banishment. The Puritan experiment in biblical literalism was cracking. George Spencer's descendants, if he had any, never claimed him. The New Haven records were recopied in the 1800s, and the clerk added a margin note, a shameful case, but justice was done. By then, New Haven was embarrassed. The boy executed in 1642 has no known grave, no descendants. His name might not even be Nathaniel. That's an educated guess based on fragmentary records. He's a blank space in the archive, except for the clinical descriptions of his violation and the warrant for his death. William Plain, the first man executed for homosexual acts, is slightly better remembered, but only because his case was so unusual it kept getting cited. In 1716, Cotton Mather referenced it in a sermon as proof of New England's early righteousness. In 1897, a Connecticut historian called it a case best forgotten. The legal innovation, using piled-up circumstantial evidence and corrupt reputation to convict, didn't die. It morphed. The same logic appeared in vagrancy laws, in anti-cross-dressing statutes, in 20th century prosecutions for degeneracy. The idea that you could prosecute someone not just for an act, but for being a type of person, that started here, in these towns, with these magistrates who wrote everything down. One document haunts the archive. It's a letter, dated 1645, from Reverend John Rayner to Governor Winthrop. Rayner had been consulted on a sodomy case that never went to trial. He writes, "I am troubled by the frequency with which these sins come to light, and more troubled still by the frequency with which they do not." He estimates that for every case prosecuted, 10 go unreported. If he was right, then the 5 executions we know about represent maybe 50 cases. And those 50 represent how many quiet lives, how many unrecorded partnerships, how many people who simply understood the rules and hid. The Puritans built a society where they wrote everything down: sermons, laws, grocery lists. But desire doesn't leave a paper trail unless someone decides to prosecute it. Somewhere in New Haven, there's no marker for the pig and the one-eyed man buried in unmarked graves. Somewhere in Massachusetts, there's no stone for a 13-year-old who died for a crime committed against him. The ropes rotted centuries ago. The records didn't. The sources are in the description. Fact check me. This is Blood and Empire. We'll see you in the next one.